The rolling hills of western Pennsylvania stretched out under the pale October sunlight of 2014. The once vibrant landscape now faded to amber and brown, punctuated by the occasional red maple and the weathered fences that bordered Miller's Creek Farm. The two-story farmhouse stood like a tired sentinel at the end of a winding gravel drive, its white paint peeling, its green shutters hanging crookedly, and its wraparound porch sagging with the weight of decades. It was in this forgotten place that Sarah Hayes found herself alone, with nothing but 2 suitcases of belongings, $212 in her checking account, and the deed to a property that had been abandoned for nearly 7 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, her denim jacket barely enough to cut the autumn chill as she stared at the dilapidated building that was now her only possession in the world. The rural transit bus that had reluctantly dropped her at the end of the unmarked country road had disappeared 30 minutes ago, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust and the echo of the driver's puzzled parting words. "Lady, there's nothing out here but ghosts and bad memories." The family farm that her late Uncle Jack had unexpectedly left her in his will now looked like a monument to neglect and disappointment. Its faded sign hung by a single nail swinging in the brisk wind. "Miller's Creek Organic Dairy," it proclaimed, though from the looks of the overgrown pastures and collapsed barn roof, no milk had been produced here for years. As the sun began its slow descent behind the rolling hills, casting long shadows across the untended fields, Sarah squared her shoulders and took her first step toward the farmhouse that represented her last hope and final chance. The broken gravel crunched under her boots, the sound unnaturally loud in the rural stillness. Before we continue Sarah's story, you should know that this desperate moment at Miller's Creek was merely the beginning of an extraordinary journey that would challenge everything she believed about her family, about duty, and about what truly constitutes a national secret. The lock on the farmhouse door was broken, hanging uselessly from splintered wood that showed signs of a forced entry long ago. Sarah pushed the door open, wincing at the agonized creak of rusted hinges. A cloud of dust and the musty smell of abandonment billowed outward, causing her to cough and cover her mouth with her sleeve. "Hello," she called out, though she expected no response. The emptiness echoed back at her, confirming what she already knew. She was entirely alone. The interior of the farmhouse was in disarray, but not as bad as she'd feared from the exterior. Furniture draped in dusty sheets stood like silent ghosts. The kitchen counters were bare except for an ancient microwave, and the refrigerator door hung open, long since emptied and unplugged. Footprints in the dust showed that someone had been through the house recently, their deliberate path leading up the stairs and back down again. Sarah set down her suitcases and surveyed what was to be her new home with a mixture of dread and determination. When her uncle had died 6 months ago in a VA hospital 3 states away, she had been shocked to learn that he'd left her this property. They had barely known each other. Her mother's estranged brother, who had disappeared from family gatherings when Sarah was just a child. The only thing she really knew about him was that he'd served in Vietnam and had never been the same afterward, at least according to her mother's rare mentions of him. "What am I supposed to do with this, Uncle Jack?" she whispered to the empty room, confusion and weariness washing over her. Why me? Sarah had grown up in Pittsburgh, the daughter of a steel worker and a nurse. She'd been practical, hard-working, and completely unprepared for being laid off after 12 years of dedicated service to a publishing company that decided to restructure without warning. At 34, she was starting over, with no husband, no children, and no career prospects in a city where print media was dying. This inheritance had seemed like a sign, or at least a roof over her head, while she figured out her next move. The living room of the farmhouse was dominated by a stone fireplace, its mantel crowded with tarnished picture frames covered in a thick layer of dust. Sarah wiped one clean with her sleeve, revealing a faded color photograph of a young man in a military uniform, his serious expression not quite hiding the youth in his eyes. Uncle Jack, she presumed, before Vietnam, before whatever had turned him into the recluse her family rarely mentioned. She moved through the first floor, taking inventory of her inheritance. The dining room still contained a heavy oak table and 6 chairs. The small study off the main hallway housed bookshelves filled with volumes on farming, animal husbandry, and, puzzlingly, several texts on radio communications and electronics. That seemed out of place for a dairy farmer. The sound of approaching tires on gravel startled her from her exploration. Sarah's heart raced as she moved to the front window. Visitors could mean many things in this remote place: help, information, or trouble. A dusty pickup truck had pulled up beside her suitcases, which she'd left by the porch steps. A woman in her 60s emerged, her silver hair cut in a practical bob, her sturdy frame dressed in flannel and denim. She stood looking at the suitcases with obvious curiosity before turning her gaze to the house. Sarah opened the door before the woman could knock. "Hello," she called, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The woman turned, surprise evident in her weathered face. "Well, I'll be. Someone's finally moved in." She approached the porch with the careful gait of someone with arthritic knees. "Margaret Donovan. I run the general store down in New Milford. Noticed the bus dropped someone off earlier and thought I'd check if everything was all right." "Sarah Hayes," she replied, extending her hand. "I inherited this place from my uncle, Jack Miller." Margaret's expression shifted subtly at the name. "Jack's niece? Well, that's something. Didn't know he had any family that kept in touch. We didn't really," Sarah admitted. "It was as much a surprise to me as anyone when the lawyer contacted me." Margaret studied her with the frank assessment of someone used to sizing up newcomers in a small community. "You planning to stay then? Place has been empty since Jack left. 7 years at least." "Left?" Sarah asked, latching onto this new information. "I was told he died in a veterans hospital in Ohio." Margaret's eyebrows raised slightly. "Well, that may be so for the end, but Jack cleared out of here years before that. Middle of the night, according to Hank Peterson, who drives the mail route. Said the place was just empty one day, no forwarding. Address, nothing. This didn't align with the little Sarah knew about her inheritance. She'd assumed Uncle Jack had lived here until his health failed, and he ended up in the VA system. The idea that he'd abandoned the property years earlier added another layer to the mystery of why he'd kept it and why he'd left it to a niece he barely knew. "I'm still figuring things out," Sarah said, unwilling to admit how little she knew about her uncle or his property. "But yes, I'm staying, at least for now." Margaret nodded, seeming to approve of this decision. "Well, you'll be needing supplies then. Stores open till 6 most days. We carry the basics, though nothing fancy. For that, you'd need to drive to Somerset." "I don't have a car," Sarah admitted. "Not yet, anyway." Margaret looked toward the distant road and then back at Sarah. "That'll be tough out here. Nothing's walking distance except maybe the Hendersons' place about a mile west." She seemed to come to a decision. "Tell you what, I can bring you some essentials tomorrow. Enough to tide you over till you get your bearings." The unexpected kindness from a stranger left Sarah momentarily speechless. "That's very generous. I can pay you, of course." "We'll settle up later," Margaret replied with a dismissive wave. "Neighbors help neighbors out here. That's how it works." She turned to leave, then paused. "One thing you should know, Miss Hayes. There've been people asking about this property over the years. Men in suits, not from around here. Government types, most likely. They never say exactly what they want, but they've been persistent. Might want to be careful who you talk to about the place." Before Sarah could ask more, Margaret had returned to her truck. "I'll be by tomorrow around 10, she called as she started the engine. "Lock your doors tonight." With that cryptic warning, she drove away, leaving Sarah standing on the porch with more questions than answers. The mention of government officials interested in the property sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the October air. As the daylight began to fade, Sarah realized she needed to establish some basic comforts before night fell completely. She found a working flashlight in a kitchen drawer and located the circuit breaker in the basement. To her surprise, when she flipped the main switch, lights flickered on throughout the house. Apparently, the electricity was still connected, though she wondered who had been paying the bill for an abandoned property. The propane tank outside showed half full on its gauge, which meant she might have hot water and the ability to cook on the old gas stove. Small mercies that made the prospect of her first night less daunting. In the fading light, Sarah dragged her suitcases upstairs and selected what appeared to be the master bedroom for herself. The room was surprisingly tidy compared to the rest of the house, with a queen-sized bed still made up with faded but clean linens. She stripped these off and replaced them with her own sheets, brought from her Pittsburgh apartment. As she tucked in the corners of the fitted sheet, her hand brushed against something hard beneath the mattress. Curious, she lifted the corner and discovered a small leather-bound notebook, its pages yellow with age. Opening it revealed entries in a cramped, precise handwriting, dated entries that appeared to be some kind of log or journal. The first entry was dated January 15th, 1982, frequency disruption at 300 hours, pattern matches, previous intercepts from Kiev station. Duration, 12 minutes, triangulation unsuccessful. Henderson reports similar anomaly at his station, will adjust array coordinates and attempt capture tonight. Sarah frowned, puzzled by the technical language and unexpected content. This didn't sound like the diary of a dairy farmer. She flipped through more pages, finding similar entries, many including strings of numbers and coordinates. At the back of the journal, something fell out, a faded photograph of 3 men standing in front of what looked like a large satellite dish, partially hidden in a stand of pine trees. She turned it over and read the faded ink on the back. JMHHRT, Operation Blackbird, 1985. One of the men was clearly a younger version of the soldier from the photo downstairs, her Uncle Jack. The other 2 were strangers to her, but they all wore civilian clothes, despite the military posture they maintained for the camera. Sarah set down the journal, a strange feeling settling over her. Her practical, no-nonsense mind wanted to dismiss what she was seeing, but the evidence was becoming harder to ignore. Uncle Jack had been involved in something more complicated than farming, something that might explain Margaret's mention of government officials asking questions. As night fell completely outside, casting the farmhouse in darkness, except for the small pools of light from the working lamps, Sarah continued to explore her inheritance with growing unease and fascination. In the closet of what seemed to be a guest bedroom, she found a locked metal trunk. Without the key, she couldn't access its contents, but its military green color and heavy-duty construction suggested it wasn't storing extra blankets or family photo albums. In the bathroom medicine cabinet, behind a dusty bottle of aftershave, she discovered a false back that concealed a small space containing several passports. All featured Jack's photo, but with different names. Sarah sat on the edge of the clawfoot tub, the passports spread around her, trying to reconcile the uncle she barely remembered, her mother's quiet, troubled brother who sent birthday cards, with $5 bills. With whatever complicated life these documents suggested, the distant sound of a vehicle on the main road brought her back to the present. She quickly gathered the passports and journal, wrapping them in a towel and placing them in her suitcase. Margaret's warning about being careful suddenly seemed much more urgent. As she prepared for bed, making a simple meal from the protein bars and bottled water she'd brought in her luggage, Sarah contemplated her situation. She had come to Miller's Creek seeking refuge from her failures in Pittsburgh, hoping for nothing more than a quiet place to regroup and plan her next move. Instead, she had stumbled into what appeared to be a decades-old mystery centered on an uncle she had never really known. In the quiet darkness of the farmhouse, with only the occasional creaking of old timber and the distant hooting of an owl to break the silence, Sarah made a decision. Tomorrow she would begin a systematic exploration of the property. Whatever secrets Uncle Jack had been keeping, they might be the key to understanding why he had left her this farm, and why people in suits were still asking questions about it years after he'd abandoned it. As she drifted towards sleep, her mind filled with questions. Who had really been Jack Miller? What was Operation Blackbird? And perhaps most critically, if government officials were interested in this property, how long would it be before they discovered she had taken up residence? The morning light filtered through the faded curtains, casting patterns across Sarah's face and waking her from a restless sleep filled with dreams of shadowy figures and hidden rooms. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was until the unfamiliar ceiling came into focus and reality settled in. Miller's Creek Farm, her inheritance, her new beginning. She sat up, listening to the profound silence of rural isolation, so different from the constant background noise of her Pittsburgh apartment. No traffic sounds, no neighbors' televisions, no hum of the city. Just the occasional bird call and the soft whisper of wind through the trees outside. Sarah's first full day at the farm began with a thorough inventory of her immediate needs. The kitchen faucet produced rusty water that eventually ran clear. The well system apparently still functioning. The ancient water heater in the basement grudgingly provided a lukewarm shower. The refrigerator hummed to life when plugged in, though it would need hours to cool properly. While waiting for Margaret's promised delivery, Sarah returned to her exploration of the house, this time with the methodical approach she'd developed. During her years as a publishing assistant, she found a notebook and began cataloguing each room, its contents, and any unusual features. The study yielded the most immediate discoveries. Behind the outdated farming manuals on the bookshelves, she found technical texts on radio wave propagation, electronic surveillance, and cryptography, subjects far removed from dairy farming. A locked file cabinet stood in the corner, its government green metal matching the trunk she'd found upstairs. Sarah was contemplating how to open the locked cabinet when she heard Margaret's truck coming up the drive. She quickly closed the study. Dodorn went to meet her first visitor. "Morning," Margaret called, climbing down from her pickup with more agility than her age might suggest. The truck bed was loaded with grocery bags, a propane canister, and what appeared to be basic cleaning supplies. "Brought you enough to get through a few days at least." "This is incredibly kind," Sarah said, helping unload the supplies. "I insist on paying you back." "We'll settle up," Margaret repeated her phrase from yesterday, as they carried everything. Inside, the older woman glanced around with unconcealed curiosity. "Place isn't as bad as I expected. Jack always kept things orderly, even toward the end when people said he was getting peculiar." "Peculiar how?" Sarah asked, arranging groceries on the kitchen counter. Margaret seemed to choose her words carefully. "After his first few years. Here, Jack became what folks around here call private. Stopped coming to town events, declined help with the farm even as it started failing. Set up all those antennas and satellite dishes out behind the old dairy barn." "Antennas?" Sarah tried to keep her tone casual despite her racing heart. "Oh yes, quite the setup from what Hank described. Said it looked like NASA had set up shop in the North Pasture." Margaret shrugged. "Veterans sometimes come back with unusual hobbies. We figured he was a ham radio enthusiast or one of those UFO hunters." This new information aligned with the journal entries Sarah had found. She decided to probe further. "Did my uncle have many visitors?" Friends from his military days, perhaps? Not that anyone noticed, though that doesn't mean much. This is a place where people mind their own business. Margaret paused in unpacking a bag of apples, except for those government men who started showing up after he left. Different ones over the years, asking the same questions. Where did Jack go? Did he leave anything behind? Had he received any unusual visitors? What did people tell them? The truth. Nobody knew where Jack went. He kept to himself. Margaret fixed Sarah with a direct look. Now they'll be asking about you. Jack's niece, suddenly appearing after all this time. The warning was clear in her tone. Before Sarah could respond, a sharp knock on the front door startled them both. Through the small window beside the door, Sarah could see a black SUV parked next to Margaret's truck and two men in suits standing on the porch. Her eyes met Margaret's, whose expression clearly said, "Told you so." Taking a deep breath, Sarah opened the door. The men were a study in contrasts, one tall and lean with graying temples, the other younger with a solid build and military short hair. Both wore dark suits that seemed too formal for rural Pennsylvania. Both carried themselves with the unmistakable posture of authority. "Ms. Hayes?" The older man spoke first. "I'm Special Agent Thomas Foster, FBI. This is my colleague, Agent Reyes. We'd like to ask you a few questions about this property and your uncle, Jack Miller." Sarah felt her mouth go dry, but managed to keep her expression neutral. "May I see some identification?" They produced official FBI credentials, which Sarah examined carefully. Her years processing legal documents in publishing had taught her to spot inconsistencies, but these appeared genuine. "What's this about?" she asked, still blocking the doorway. "Standard follow-up," Foster replied smoothly. "Your uncle was of interest in an ongoing investigation. When we learned the property had a new occupant, we thought it prudent to introduce ourselves." Margaret appeared at Sarah's shoulder. "You boys are a long way from your usual territory. The new Milford sheriff handles most issues around here." Foster's professional smile didn't reach his eyes. "This falls under federal jurisdiction, ma'am. Nothing for local authorities to concern themselves with." "I just arrived yesterday," Sarah said. "I barely knew my uncle. I can't imagine how I could help." "Any investigation? May we come in?" Reyes asked, his voice carrying a subtle authority that suggested he wasn't really asking. Sarah hesitated, then stepped aside. The agents entered, their gaze sweeping the interior with practiced efficiency, noting exits, windows, and the layout. They followed Sarah to the kitchen, where Margaret had resumed unpacking groceries with deliberate nonchalance. "Coffee?" Sarah offered, playing for time to collect her thoughts. "No, thank you," Foster declined. "We won't take much of your time. We understand your uncle left this property rather suddenly about 7 years ago." Sarah nodded. "That's what I've been told. We weren't close. I hadn't seen him since I was a child. Yet he left you the farm in his will," Reyes noted, his tone making it sound vaguely suspicious. "I was as surprised as anyone," Sarah replied honestly. "I'm his only living relative as far as I know." Foster pulled out a small notebook. "Have you found anything unusual since your arrival? Papers, electronic equipment, storage devices?" The journal and passports immediately came to Sarah's mind, but instinct told her to keep them to herself for now. "I've barely had time to explore. Everything seems like standard farm equipment, though much of it is in disrepair. Your uncle's activities here weren't exclusively agricultural," Foster stated, watching her reaction closely. "So I'm learning," Sarah responded carefully. "Ms. Donovan mentioned something about antennas." Margaret shot her a warning glance, but remained silent. "Your uncle was involved in sensitive work before his farming career," Foster continued. "We have reason to believe he may have continued certain projects after his official retirement." "What "And kind of projects?" Sarah asked. "That remains classified," Reyes cut in. "But any materials he left behind could have national security implications." The tension in the kitchen was palpable. Sarah felt caught in a game whose rules she didn't understand, between people with agendas she couldn't fathom. Her uncle, man who had sent her birthday cards with $5 bills and whom she remembered mainly as a quiet presence at occasional family gatherings, had apparently been involved in something significant enough to keep the FBI interested years after his disappearance. "I'd be happy to contact you if I find anything that seems unusual," Sarah offered, trying to sound cooperative while buying herself time. "My plan is to assess the property this week and decide whether to sell or attempt to restore it." Foster handed her a business card. "We'd appreciate that. And Miss Hayes?" His tone hardened slightly. "It would be best if you contacted us directly, rather than discussing any findings with others. For your own safety." The implied threat hung in the air as the agents thanked her for her time and departed. Sarah and Margaret watched from the window as the black SUV disappeared down the gravel drive. "Well," Margaret said dryly once they were alone, "welcome to Miller's Creek. Government men typically wait at least a week before dropping by." "What just happened?" Sarah asked, her composed facade crumbling now that the agents were gone. "Exactly what I warned you about." Margaret resumed unpacking groceries, as if federal agents dropping by was an everyday occurrence. "They've been sniffing around periodically since Jack left. Usually different agents, but always the same questions. But what could my uncle possibly have been involved in? He was a dairy farmer." Margaret's laugh held little humor. "Honey, Jack Miller was about as much a dairy farmer as I am an astronaut. He bought this place in 81 or 82, after whatever he did in the military. Tried his hand at farming for appearance's sake, but everyone knew his real interests were elsewhere." "The antennas," Sarah murmured, "and the visitors that would come late at night, and the equipment deliveries with government markings." Margaret shrugged. "Folks around here don't pry, especially with veterans. Jack was quiet, paid his bills, and never caused trouble. That was enough." Sarah sank into a kitchen chair, her mind racing. "The FBI agents mentioned classified work and national security. Cold War never really ended out here," Margaret said cryptically. "Now, I've got to get back to the store. Will you be all right?" Sarah nodded, though she felt anything but all right. As Margaret prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. "One more thing you should know. Jack had friends, or colleagues more like, 3 men who would visit every few months. They stopped coming about a year before Jack himself disappeared." She fixed Sarah with a meaningful look. "One of them was Hank Henderson, who owns the property that borders yours to the west. If anyone knows what your uncle was really doing out here, it would be Hank." After Margaret left, Sarah went to the bedroom and retrieved the journal and passports from her suitcase. The photo of 3 men standing before a satellite dish took on new significance. The initials on the back, JM, HH, RT, Jack Miller, Hank Henderson, and someone with the initials RT determined to understand what she had stumbled into. Sarah decided to explore the north pasture, where the antennas had supposedly been located. She changed into jeans and sturdy boots, pocketed the journal, and headed out the back door. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. The farm's layout became clearer in daylight. The main house where she had spent the night, a large dairy barn about 100 yards away, several smaller outbuildings in various states of disrepair, and beyond them, rolling pastures bordered by dense woods. The dairy barn's massive doors were secured with a heavy padlock that didn't match the aged wood surrounding it, a newer security measure on an old structure. With no key and no tools to break the lock, Sarah made a mental note to search the house for keys later and continued toward the north pasture. As she crested a small rise, the landscape opened before her. What Margaret had described as Jack's Antenna array was gone, with only concrete footings and the occasional metal bracket remaining as evidence that substantial structures had once stood there. The ground showed signs of systematic dismantling, not the gradual decay of abandonment, but deliberate removal. Sarah consulted the journal, flipping to entries from 2007, the year before Jack had apparently abandoned the property. The writing became increasingly erratic, with mentions of increased surveillance and compromised security protocols. The final entry, dated October 3, 2007, contained a single cryptic line: "Failsafe initiated. Network compromised. Moving to secondary location per contingency OB7. God help us if they've already found it." She stood in the center of the concrete pads where whatever equipment Jack had been operating once stood, trying to make sense of it all. Cold War technology, FBI agents, classified projects, none of it aligned with the uncle she thought she knew. A movement at the edge of the woods caught her attention. A figure watched her from the tree line, partially obscured by the shadows of tall pines. When Sarah raised her hand in uncertain greeting, the figure retreated deeper into the forest. Heart pounding, Sarah hurried back toward the farmhouse. The sensation of being watched prickled along her spine, though when she turned to look, the tree line appeared empty. She quickened her pace, suddenly aware of how isolated the property was and how little she knew about her surroundings. Back inside, Sarah double-checked that all doors and windows were secured. The encounter at the edge of the woods, combined with the FBI visit, had shattered any illusion that she could quietly settle into rural life while figuring out her next steps. She spread the journal, passports and photograph on the kitchen table. Along with Agent Foster's business card, her options seemed limited. Contact the FBI and turn over everything she'd found, potentially involving herself in something far more complex than she understood. Sell the farm immediately and return to Pittsburgh, abandoning her inheritance and the mystery it contained, or follow the thread of clues to understand what her uncle had been involved in and why he had left her the farm. The third option carried obvious risks, but also offered the possibility of answers. If Jack had been involved in classified work, why leave the property to her? Was it simply because she was his only living relative, or had he intended for her to find something? Sarah's gaze fell on the photograph again. JM HHRT Operation Blackbird, 1985. Henderson, Margaret had said, owned the neighboring property to the west, a mile's walk according to her estimation. Decision made, Sarah tucked the journal and photograph into her jacket pocket. She would visit Hank Henderson and see if he could shed light on her uncle's activities. Before leaving, she carefully re-examined the photo. If Henderson was one of the three men pictured, she would recognize him immediately. As she stepped off the porch, Sarah noticed fresh tire tracks in the gravel, not from Margaret's truck or the FBI's SUV, but a third vehicle that had apparently approached the house while she was exploring the north pasture. The tracks showed the vehicle had stopped, turned around, and departed without coming all the way to the house. Someone else was watching the property. Sarah hesitated, suddenly uncertain about leaving the farmhouse unattended. But the need for answers outweighed her concerns about the house itself. Whatever Jack had been involved in, it wasn't confined to the past. The FBI's visit and now these mysterious tracks confirmed that his secrets remained very much alive and potentially dangerous. With a final glance at the quiet farmhouse, Sarah set off toward the western property line, following a faint tractor path through the tall grass. The journal in her pocket seemed to grow heavier with each step, its cryptic entries a roadmap to a mystery she was only beginning to understand. The path to Henderson's property narrowed as Sarah crossed the western boundary of her uncle's farm, marked only by a weathered fence post with a rusted "No Trespassing" sign hanging askew. The late morning sun filtered through the trees, creating dappled shadows that shifted with each breeze. In the distance, she could make out what appeared to be a modest cabin nestled against a backdrop of pine forest, presumably Henderson's place. As Sarah approached, details emerged that set this property apart from her uncle's neglected farm. Solar panels gleamed on the south-facing roof. A neat vegetable garden occupied a fenced area to one side. Most notably, a tower rose behind the cabin, supporting what looked like sophisticated communications equipment, a smaller version of what might have once stood in her uncle's north pasture. Before she could reach the cabin's clearing, a dog's bark shattered the quiet. A large German shepherd emerged from behind the structure, followed by a man carrying a shotgun, pointed casually toward the ground. Not threatening, but certainly not welcoming. "That's far enough," the man called. He was in his 70s, lean and weathered, with sharp eyes that belied his age. His silver hair was cropped short in a military-style cut that had likely been his preference for decades. Sarah stopped, raising her hands slightly to show they were empty. "Mr. Henderson, my name is Sarah Hayes. Jack Miller was my uncle." The change in the man's posture was subtle but immediate, a slight straightening of the spine, a tightening around the eyes. Recognition, certainly, but whether positive or negative, Sarah couldn't tell. "Miller never mentioned any niece," Henderson replied, though he lowered the shotgun slightly. "We weren't close," Sarah admitted. "But he left me the farm when he died." Henderson studied her for a long moment, then whistled softly. The dog stopped barking and sat at attention by his side. "Come on then," he said finally, turning toward the cabin. "Daytime's wasting." Sarah followed him to a covered porch furnished with 2 rocking chairs and a small table. The cabin's exterior gave an impression of rustic simplicity, but Sarah noticed security cameras discreetly positioned at the corners and what appeared to be a keypad entry system beside the main door, surprisingly sophisticated for such a remote location. Henderson leaned the shotgun against the wall and gestured for her to take a seat. "Coffee." "Please," she accepted, recognizing the offer as a small olive branch. He disappeared inside briefly, returning with 2 steaming mugs. The dog settled at his feet, still watching Sarah with alert eyes. "So," Henderson began, "Jack's dead." It wasn't a question, but a flat statement, as if confirming something long suspected. According to the lawyer, he died in a VA hospital in Ohio 6 months ago. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "Pancreatic cancer." Henderson nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "And now you own the farm." "Apparently." Sarah took a chance and removed the photograph from her pocket, sliding it across the small table. "I found this in the farmhouse. I believe that's you, with my uncle." Henderson didn't touch the photograph, but glanced down at it, his face tightening almost imperceptibly. "Where did you find this?" "Hidden in a journal. There were other things, too. Passports with different names, technical books, references to something called Operation Blackbird." Sarah watched his reaction carefully. "The FBI visited this morning." Henderson's laugh held no humor. "Didn't take them long, did it? Always efficient, I'll give them that." He finally picked up the photograph, studying it with an expression that might have been nostalgia or regret. "What did they want?" They asked if I'd found anything unusual. "Papers, electronic equipment, storage devices. They mentioned national security." "And what did you tell them?" "That I'd just arrived and hadn't found anything significant." Sarah met his gaze directly. "I didn't mention the journal or the passports." Henderson nodded approvingly. "Smart girl." He tapped the photograph. "This was taken in '85, height of the Cold War, though most Americans thought it was winding down by then." "They were wrong." "The third man," Sarah prompted. "RT in the notation. Who was he?" "Robert Taylor, communications specialist, brilliant with signals technology." Henderson's voice softened slightly. "Died in 2006, heart attack supposedly." Supposedly. Henderson ignored the question. What do you know about your uncle's military service? Almost nothing, Sarah admitted. My mother rarely spoke about him. I know he served in Vietnam, came back changed somehow. Family gatherings were awkward. He stopped coming around when I was young. Henderson seemed to make a decision. He stood abruptly. Come with me. He led her around the cabin to a small outbuilding that looked like a garden shed from the outside. Henderson entered a code on a keypad, and the door unlocked with an electronic click. Inside was not gardening equipment, but a sophisticated communication center. Computers, radio equipment, and monitors displaying what looked like data feeds and surveillance camera views. What is all this? Sarah asked, stunned by the contrast. Between the rustic exterior and high-tech interior. Insurance, Henderson replied cryptically. He moved to a metal filing cabinet, unlocked it with a key from his pocket, and withdrew a thick folder. Your uncle wasn't just any soldier. He was signal intelligence assigned to a special NSA unit monitoring Soviet communications during Vietnam. After the war, the three of us, Jack, Robert, and myself, were recruited for a black project codenamed Blackbird. He handed Sarah the folder. Inside were documents, most stamped with classified or top-secret designations detailing something, called the Weather Mountain Station, and its mission parameters. Between 1980 and 2007, we operated a listening post right there on your uncle's farm, Henderson continued. Officially, we were retired. Unofficially, we were monitoring specific frequency bands for communications that never appeared in official military or intelligence channels. Sarah looked up from the documents, trying to process what she was hearing. You were spying. For whom? Not for. On. Henderson's expression was grim. We were monitoring a shadow communications network within our own government, a network we discovered accidentally during our official NSA work. Transmissions that bypassed normal channels, using Soviet-inspired encryption protocols but originating from inside the US. The implications were staggering. You're saying there were Soviet assets inside the American government. We never knew exactly who was behind it. That wasn't our job. We just monitored the traffic, documented patterns, identified transmission sources when possible. Henderson's voice held the practiced detachment of someone accustomed to compartmentalizing. Information. We reported to a single handler, codenamed Cardinal. No direct contact, just dead drops and secure transmissions. But why operate from a farm in Pennsylvania? Why not within the official intelligence infrastructure? Henderson's laugh was short and bitter, because we didn't know how far the network reached. By the mid-80s, we had evidence suggesting penetration at high levels of multiple agencies. We went private, off books, funded through channels even. We didn't fully understand. Sarah tried to align this information with what she knew about her reclusive uncle. The FBI agent said my uncle's work had national security implications. Of course they did, Henderson scoffed. They've been trying to locate our files for years, especially since Jack went dark in 2007. What happened in 2007? Sarah asked, remembering the final journal entry. The journal mentioned a failsafe and moving to a secondary location. Henderson tensed visibly. Robert died or was killed in 2006. 9 months later, there was a breach. Someone compromised our communications protocol. Jack initiated the failsafe procedure, destroying equipment, dispersing records, and relocating essential data to secure caches. And then he disappeared, Sarah finished. We had contingencies in place, new identities, resources, fallback positions. Henderson's voice grew quieter. I stayed because I was too old to run, and someone needed to maintain the secondary monitoring station. He gestured around the communications room, scaled down but functional. Sarah's mind reeled with implications. If what you're saying is true, my uncle wasn't just monitoring communications, he was hiding from something within our own government. Not someone. Henderson moved to a computer terminal and typed rapidly. A map appeared, showing what looked like transmission points across the eastern United States. The network never went away. It evolved, adapted. Whoever these people are, they're patient. They play the long game. Sarah studied the map, noting clustered points around Washington, D.C., New York, and surprisingly western Pennsylvania. There's a concentration near here. Pittsburgh area, Henderson confirmed. Military contractors, research facilities, transportation infrastructure. We've tracked unusual communications patterns in that region for decades. A chilling thought occurred to Sarah. Could they have known about me? Before I inherited the farm. Henderson's expression was grave. It's possible. Jack was careful, but these people are thorough. Your arrival may not be coincidental to them. The FBI visit, Sarah murmured. They were here less than 24 hours after I arrived. Standard procedure would involve monitoring property records, tracking ownership changes. Henderson nodded, though their response time suggests they consider the farm a high-priority location. Sarah thought about the fresh tire tracks she'd seen. There was another vehicle at the farm while I was exploring the north pasture. Someone watching. Maybe. Henderson's posture changed, alert and concerned. You need to be careful, Ms. Hayes. These people don't recognize boundaries, legal, ethical, or otherwise. What should I do? The question came out more vulnerable than Sarah intended, but the enormity of what Henderson was suggesting overwhelmed her practiced self-reliance. That depends on what Jack left for you to find, Henderson replied. Your uncle wouldn't have left you the farm without a reason. He was meticulous, strategic. Everything had a purpose. Sarah thought about her inheritance, a property she'd never seen, from an uncle she barely knew. The lawyer said Uncle Jack changed his will just 3 weeks before he died. He must have known I would inherit, and he would have expected you to search the property, Henderson concluded, which means he left something for you to find. The journal, the passports, Sarah suggested. Henderson shook his head. Those were just breadcrumbs. Jack would have secured the critical data more carefully. He studied her thoughtfully. Did the lawyer mention anything unusual about the inheritance, specific conditions or instructions? Sarah tried to recall the details of her brief interaction with the estate attorney. He mentioned that Uncle Jack was explicit about the property, transferring to me directly, not being sold as part of the estate. And there was something about the mineral rights being separated from the surface deed. Henderson's expression sharpened with interest. Mineral rights? That's it? What's it? It's a common intelligence technique, hiding information in plain sight by embedding it in legitimate legal documents. Henderson was already moving toward another filing cabinet. In rural property transfers, mineral rights are often separated for legitimate reasons. Oil and gas leases, mining claims. It provides perfect cover for embedding coded information. He withdrew a large map and spread it across a table. This shows the underground features of this entire valley. Caves, aquifers, abandoned mine shafts. There's an extensive network beneath both our properties. Sarah examined the map, noting a series of passages running beneath what would be her uncle's farm. Are you saying there's something hidden underground? The most secure place to store sensitive materials would be somewhere not easily accessible, somewhere not obvious from surface inspection. Henderson traced a path with his finger. This old coal mine shaft extends beneath your property. The entrance is on Wilkins' land to the east, but the main chambers run under the north pasture, right where Jack had his primary antenna array. Sarah remembered the concrete pads she'd seen earlier. The equipment is gone, but there might be something beneath it. Exactly. Henderson folded the map. Jack would have created a secure storage location, something that wouldn't appear on any official survey or property record. How would I even find it? Sarah asked. The north pasture is acres of open field. Henderson considered this. There would be markers, reference points, that only someone looking for them would recognize. He glanced at the journal in Sarah's hand. May I? She handed it over, and Henderson flipped through the pages with practiced efficiency. Here, he said, pointing to a series of notations. These aren't just equipment logs, they're coordinates. Using a modified military grid system, Jack was documenting locations relative to fixed reference points. The technical language meant little to Sarah, but Henderson's confidence was reassuring. Can you translate them? Help me find whatever my uncle might have hidden? Henderson hesitated, clearly weighing his options. These people, whoever they are, have been searching for decades. If they realize you're actively looking for Jack's cash, you'll become an immediate target. I already am, aren't I? Sarah countered. The FBI visit, the mysterious vehicle. They're watching the farm. There's a difference between routine surveillance and active intervention, Henderson warned. Right now, they're observing. If they believe you're closing in on sensitive information, that will change quickly. Sarah thought about her situation. Unemployed, starting over, with nowhere to go but forward. I need to know why my uncle left me this farm, what he wanted me to find. Henderson studied her, perhaps seeing something of Jack Miller in his niece's determination. I can help interpret the coordinates, but we'll need to be careful. No obvious patterns, nothing that would attract attention from surveillance. How do we do that? You establish a routine, predictable activities they can observe and dismiss. Cleaning the house, exploring the outbuildings, normal activities for someone assessing an inherited property. Henderson's tactical mind was clearly engaged now. Meanwhile, we'll work methodically through Jack's notes, identifying the most likely location for his secure cache. Sarah nodded, accepting the necessity of caution. What about the FBI? They'll be back. Be cooperative, but limited in what you share. Let them inspect the property if they insist. There's nothing visible to find. The real objective is underground. Henderson returned the journal. Keep this and any other document secure, not in the house if possible. I could bring them here, Sarah suggested. Henderson shook his head. Too risky. They might be watching. Both properties now. Find a neutral location, somewhere not connected to either of us. As if on cue, Henderson's security system emitted a soft beep. He moved to a monitor, showing a camera feed of the approach to his property. A dark sedan was moving slowly along the access road. Visitors, Henderson said grimly. And not the friendly kind. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. FBI, maybe, or others. Henderson's expression hardened. You need to leave immediately. There's a trail through the backwoods that will take you to your property without using the main path. Trinity can guide you. He nodded toward the German shepherd, who was already alert. But no time to argue. Take this. He handed her a small device that looked like a basic flip phone. Secure communication. Can't be easily tracked. I'll contact you once our visitors have left. Sarah pocketed the device. What will you tell them? That I'm a reclusive old veteran who values his privacy, Henderson said with a grim smile. Not even a lie. He opened a rear door. Go now. Stay with Trinity until you reach your property line, then send her back. As Sarah slipped out the back door, Henderson called after her softly. Whatever Jack hid, it was worth dying to protect. Remember that. The woods behind Henderson's cabin were dense, the trail barely visible to untrained eyes. Trinity moved ahead confidently, occasionally looking back to ensure Sarah followed. The sounds of the forest, birdsong, rustling leaves, the occasional crack of a branch covered their movement. Sarah's mind raced with everything Henderson had revealed. Her uncle, a signals intelligence operative involved in monitoring a shadow. network within the US government, a hidden cache of information somewhere beneath her property, and unknown forces still actively searching for that information years later. What had seemed like a simple inheritance, a chance to regroup after losing her job, had transformed into something far more complex and potentially dangerous. Yet, beneath her apprehension, Sarah felt a growing resolve. Uncle Jack had chosen her specifically, changing his will weeks before his death to ensure she received the property. Whatever secrets he had hidden, he had entrusted them to her, believing she would understand the breadcrumbs he'd left behind. As she neared her property line, Sarah caught a glimpse of a vehicle through the trees, not on her uncle's farm, but on the road that ran along its eastern boundary. The black sedan was parked just off the road, positioned to observe the farmhouse without being immediately obvious to anyone inside. Surveillance, just as Henderson had warned. Trinity whined softly, sensing Sarah's tension. They had reached the property line marked by the same weathered fence posts she'd passed earlier. Sarah knelt beside the dog, whispering, "Go home," as Henderson had instructed. The shepherd hesitated, then turned and trotted back the way they had come, disappearing into the underbrush within seconds. Alone now, Sarah considered her options. The farmhouse was visible in the distance, its weathered form somehow more ominous now that she understood some of what had transpired there. The black sedan's presence confirmed she was being watched. Going directly back would reveal she had visited Henderson, potentially raising suspicions. Instead, she circled toward the old dairy barn, approaching her property from a different angle to suggest she had been exploring the outlying areas of the farm. The heavy padlock on the barn doors remained an obstacle, but she noticed a smaller side entrance partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. This door was secured with a simpler lock, rusted from years of exposure. Sarah found a length of pipe discarded nearby and, after several attempts, managed to break the corroded mechanism. The door creaked open, revealing the barn's cavernous interior. Unlike the farmhouse, the barn showed signs of deliberate dismantling, rather than simple abandonment. Where dairy equipment would have stood, there were only mounting brackets and electrical outlets. The concrete floor had sections that appeared newer than others, as if portions had been removed and re-poured. In the center of the barn, a rectangular area of concrete approximately 6 by 8 feet stood slightly raised from the surrounding floor. Unlike the weathered gray of the original flooring, this section appeared to have been poured more recently, its surface still retaining a darker hue. Sarah approached it carefully, recalling Henderson's comments about underground storage. Could this be an access point to whatever lay beneath the farm? She examined the edges of the rectangular section, noting small hinges embedded along one side, nearly invisible unless specifically sought. A trap door, disguised as a simple concrete repair. Sarah's heart raced as she searched for a mechanism to open it. There was no obvious handle or latch, just the smooth surface of the concrete. She recalled the journal's cryptic notations, wondering if they might include instructions for accessing this hidden entrance. Before she could investigate further, the sound of tires on gravel reached her through the barn's open door. Someone had arrived at the farmhouse. Sarah quickly exited the barn, securing the side door as best she could, and headed toward the house with the casual gait of someone simply returning from a walk around the property. As she rounded the front of the farmhouse, Sarah saw not the black sedan she'd glimpsed earlier, but a county sheriff's department cruiser. A uniformed officer stood on the porch, apparently preparing to leave a note on the door. "Can I help you?" Sarah called, approaching with deliberate openness. The officer turned, a woman in her 40s with the weathered complexion of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. "Ms. Hayes, I'm Deputy Collins with the County Sheriff's Department, just making a courtesy call to welcome you to the area. The timing seemed too convenient to be coincidental." "That's very thoughtful. I was just exploring the property, Deputy. Collins smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. It's procedure for when properties change hands, especially in remote areas. Sheriff likes to maintain a personal connection with residents. I appreciate that, Sarah replied, matching the deputy's professional cordiality, while noting the way her gaze catalogued details of the property and Sarah herself. I understand you had some federal visitors this morning, Collins continued. Everything all right? So the local authorities were aware of the FBI's visit. Interesting. Just routine questions about my uncle's property, nothing concerning. Collins nodded, though her expression suggested skepticism. Well, we consider this our jurisdiction first and foremost. Any problems, you call us before anyone else. She handed Sarah a card. Direct line to the station. We respond quicker than any feds can get out here from Pittsburgh. The subtle territorial claim wasn't lost. On Sarah, thank you, Deputy, I'll keep that in mind. As Collins returned to her cruiser, she paused. One more thing, Ms. Hayes, you might want to be careful about your hiking routes. Some of the neighboring properties aren't clearly marked, but the owners take trespassing seriously, especially Old Henderson to the west. The warning was clear. They knew or suspected she had visited Henderson. Sarah maintained her neutral expression. I'll be more careful. Still learning the boundaries? Collins nodded and departed, leaving Sarah on the porch with a growing sense that the layers of surveillance and interest in her uncle's property extended beyond just the FBI. Local law enforcement, federal agents, mysterious observers in black, Sadens, all circling a seemingly ordinary farm in rural Pennsylvania. The secure phone Henderson had given her felt heavy in her pocket. Whatever her uncle had hidden beneath the farm, multiple parties were interested in finding it, and Sarah was caught in the middle, holding pieces to a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. Inside the farmhouse, Sarah locked the doors and pulled the curtains closed, creating at least the illusion of privacy. The sheriff deputy's visit had reinforced Henderson's warnings about surveillance, leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable. She needed to think, to plan her next moves. Carefully, Sarah spread her uncle's journal on the kitchen table, examining the coordinates Henderson had identified. Without his expertise in military grid systems, the notations remained largely indecipherable, but she could recognize patterns, repeated numbers and symbols that suggested specific locations on the property. The trapdoor in the barn seemed the most obvious place to start, but approaching it in daylight with potential observers watching the property would be foolish. Night would provide better cover, though navigating unfamiliar underground spaces in darkness presented its own challenges. Sarah's publishing background had included work on several technical manuals and military histories, giving her a methodical approach to information processing. She found a blank notebook in her suitcase and began transcribing the journal entries, looking for recurring terms and references that might provide context for the cryptic notations. 3 terms appeared with particular frequency: chimera, sentinel, and backstop. Based on the surrounding text, Sarah deduced that chimera likely referred to the shadow network her uncle had been monitoring, while sentinel appeared to be the code name for his own listening operation. Backstop remained unclear, though it seemed connected to some kind of contingency plan. A passage from 2005 caught her attention, Sentinel configuration modified per Cardinal's instructions. Primary archive relocated to Backstop Alpha, duress protocols established with Henderson and Taylor. If compromised, standard purge procedure insufficient, full activation of Chimera countermeasures required. The entry suggested that whatever her uncle had been hiding, this primary archive had been moved to something called Backstop Alpha 2 years before his disappearance. If this referred to a physical location, it might explain the trapdoor in the barn. A secure underground facility would provide ideal storage for sensitive materials. As afternoon faded toward evening, Sarah maintained a visible presence around the farmhouse, establishing the routine Henderson had suggested. She cleaned windows, examined the property's perimeter fencing, and took photos with her phone, all activities consistent with someone assessing an inherited property. Meanwhile, she kept alert for any signs of surveillance, noting a change in vehicles on the Eastern Road around 4 p.m. when the black sedan was replaced by a dark blue SUV. When darkness fell, Sarah prepared for her expedition to the barn. She dressed in dark clothes, packed a flashlight, the journal, and Henderson's secure phone, and waited until well after midnight before slipping out the back door. The quarter moon provided minimal illumination, which served her purpose. Enough. Light to navigate, but not enough to make her easily visible from a distance. She approached the barn from the western side, keeping the structure between herself and the road where she had spotted the surveillance vehicles. The night was quiet, except for the occasional hoot of an owl and the persistent chorus of crickets. Sarah reached the small side door she had forced open earlier and slipped inside. The barn's interior was pitch black. Sarah waited just inside the door, allowing her eyes to adjust before risking a flashlight beam that might be visible through the barn's weathered boards. Gradually, shapes emerged from the darkness, the central support posts, remnants of stalls. Along one wall, the faint outline of the rectangular section in the center of the concrete floor. Moving carefully to minimize noise, Sarah approached the raised concrete section. By touch, she located the hinges she had noticed earlier and traced the rectangle's perimeter, searching for a mechanism to open it. The surface felt uniform, offering no obvious access point. Sarah consulted the journal using her flashlight, at its lowest setting and shielding it with her body to minimize visible light. The entry dated March 12, 2005, mentioned access protocols revised, standard key replaced with pressure sequence authentication. Pressure sequence, like a combination, but applied through pressure rather than rotation. Sarah examined the concrete surface again, this time looking for subtle irregularities. Near each corner, she detected slight circular depressions, each about the size of a quarter and nearly invisible unless specifically sought. The journal's cryptic notations included sequences of numbers, often grouped in fours. Could these represent the pressure sequence required to open the trapdoor? Sarah selected a sequence that appeared multiple times in entries from 2005, 3, 1, 4, 2. Interpreting this as the order in which to press the depressions, Sarah applied pressure. To the third corner, then the first, fourth, and second. Nothing happened. She tried again, pressing harder, but the concrete remained solid and immovable. Frustrated, Sarah referenced the journal again. A notation from April 2005 caught her attention. Calibration adjusted, standard pressure now 187. The number seemed oddly specific until Sarah recalled her uncle's military background. Standard military communication often used specific terminology. 187 might refer to something significant in his operational language. On impulse, Sarah tried tapping the sequence rather than applying constant pressure. 3 taps. On the third corner, 1 tap on the first, 4 taps on the fourth, and 2 taps on the second. A soft click emanated from beneath the concrete, followed by the barely perceptible hiss of a pneumatic system activating. The rectangular section shifted slightly, revealing a thin seam around its perimeter. Sarah placed her fingers along this edge and pulled upward. The concrete panel rose smoothly, counterbalanced to require minimal effort despite its apparent weight. Beneath was a metal staircase descending into darkness. Cool air wafted upward, carrying the scent of electronics and the faint metallic tang of a climate-controlled environment. Sarah directed her flashlight beam downward, revealing a chamber approximately 15 feet below the barn floor. The stairs, led to what appeared to be a small bunker with metal walls and a surprising lack of dust or deterioration. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah descended, careful to leave the trapdoor open for quick exit if necessary. At the bottom of the stairs, motion sensors detected her presence, and soft LED lighting activated automatically, illuminating the underground facility. The space was smaller than she had expected, perhaps 20 by 20 feet, but efficiently organized. Metal shelving lined the walls, supporting sealed containers and equipment she didn't recognize. A central workstation featured 3 computer terminals, their screens dark but indicator lights suggesting they remained in some form of standby mode. Most surprising was the room's pristine condition. Despite being sealed for years, there was no dust, no decay. Some form of environmental control system was clearly still operational, preserving the contents in stable conditions. Sarah approached the central workstation, noting a small scanner embedded in the desk's surface. Another security measure, likely biometric. According to Henderson, such facilities typically included contingency access protocols for authorized personnel other than the primary operator. The journal had mentioned duress protocols established with Henderson and Taylor. If her uncle had anticipated others needing access, there would be alternative authentication methods. Beneath the primary scanner, Sarah located a small keypad. Rather than numbers, it featured letters in a non-standard arrangement. She consulted the journal again, searching for anything that might suggest a password or access code. The entry from October 3rd, 2007, her uncle's final notation before disappearing, included a sequence she had previously overlooked. Contingency Avalon, authorized for blood-related access only, Avalon. 6 letters. The keypad awaited input. Sarah typed AVALON, and a soft chime indicated acceptance. The computer screens flickered to life, displaying a simple interface with a blinking cursor and the words, "Voice authentication required." "Jack Miller," Sarah tried, assuming the system would recognize its creator's name. "Voice pattern unrecognized." "Secondary authentication protocol initiated," responded an automated female voice. "Please state your name and relationship to primary." "User, Sarah Hayes, niece of Jack Miller." The system paused, apparently processing this information. "Genetic relative authentication protocol activated. Please place your hand on the scanner for DNA verification." The primary scanner illuminated with a soft blue light. Sarah hesitated, then placed her palm on the surface. A warm sensation spread across her skin as the scanner activated. Partial. Genetic match confirmed. Hayes, Sarah E. Authorization level. Contingency access. Welcome to Backstop Alpha. The screens changed, displaying file directories with dates ranging from 1979 to 2007. Each directory contained hundreds of files, communications logs, analysis reports, surveillance recordings, the accumulated intelligence from nearly 30 years of clandestine monitoring. "System briefing initiated for new user," the automated voice announced. A video began playing on the central screen, showing a slightly younger version of her uncle seated at this same workstation. "If you're viewing this, I'm either dead or permanently compromised," Jack Miller began without preamble. "And you're almost certainly my niece Sarah. You're the only blood relative with the necessary clearance profile, minimal digital footprint, no government employment history, no military record. They'll have a harder time connecting you to me." Sarah felt a chill hearing her uncle address her directly from years in the past. He had planned this meticulously, anticipating not just his own death, but her specific suitability as his contingency. "What you've accessed is the secure archive of Operation Sentinel, an unauthorized surveillance initiative tracking what we've codenamed the Chimera Network. Since 1979, this network has operated within and alongside legitimate U.S. intelligence. agencies directing operations that serve interests beyond or counter to official American policy. Jack's expression remained professionally detached, though his eyes conveyed the gravity of his message. We discovered their existence accidentally during routine signals analysis in Vietnam, communications using American equipment but Soviet protocols. Over time, we identified a pattern: operations with official sanction but questionable objectives, personnel transfers that concentrated certain individuals in positions of influence, resource allocations that couldn't be reconciled with stated missions. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, even in this secure recording. We brought our concerns through proper channels initially. 3 analysts who supported our findings died in apparent accidents within 6 months. That's when we understood the network's reach and went dark. The screen split to show documents, personnel files, and communications transcripts, evidence compiled over decades of surveillance. Cardinal, our only contact within the official structure, helped establish this operation with black budget resources diverted through multiple cutouts. For 28 years, we've monitored and documented the Chimera network's activities. Without detection, Jack leaned closer to the camera, until 2006, when they found Robert Taylor. His death was their warning shot. I've initiated final contingency protocols, dispersing our most critical findings to secure locations and preparing for complete disengagement. The urgency in his voice intensified. Sarah, you need to understand. These people operate with functional immunity. They've integrated so thoroughly into legitimate power structures that exposing them directly would be immediately fatal. Standard whistleblower channels are compromised. Conventional media would dismiss the evidence as conspiracy theories. He reached to adjust something off camera. This facility contains our complete operational archive, every intercept, analysis, and identification we've made since 1979. The accumulated evidence is irrefutable when viewed comprehensively, but also incredibly dangerous to possess. Jack's expression softened slightly, the first hint of personal emotion breaking through his professional demeanor. I'm sorry to place this burden on you. If I had any other option, I would have taken it. The fact that you're viewing this means I failed to find a safer resolution. The screen changed to display a complex diagram showing connections between government agencies, military contractors, and private corporations. Names were highlighted with color codes, indicating confidence levels for network affiliation. Yes. Inheritance makes you a person of interest to multiple parties, Jack continued in voiceover. FBI counterintelligence, which has been searching for our operation since we went dark. The Chimera network, which wants our archives destroyed and any witnesses eliminated. And possibly Cardinal, if he's still active and uncompromised. The diagram zoomed in on a region labeled Western Pennsylvania Operational Cluster, showing a concentration of identified network assets around Pittsburgh and its suburbs. This regional cell is particularly significant. They've established deep coverage in defense contracting, academic research, and local infrastructure. Their current focus appears to be quantum computing applications for cryptographic systems, the next frontier in signals intelligence. The diagram disappeared, replaced again by Jack's face. You have 3 options, Sarah. 1. Seal this facility and walk away. Sell the farm to the first reasonable offer. They'll eventually find this archive, but you'll be clear of it. 2. Alert the FBI to its existence. Some agents are trustworthy, but identification is nearly impossible without insider knowledge. You'd be gambling with your life. He took a deep breath. 3. Complete the mission. The briefing package in Vault 3 contains everything you need: secure communication protocols, authenticated evidence packages prepared for specific journalists and foreign intelligence services, and identity documents for emergency extraction. Jack's professional mask slipped entirely, revealing genuine emotion. "I never wanted this for you, Sarah. You deserved a normal life, free from these shadows. But I've watched you from a distance. Your resilience after your parents died, your determination through college, your adaptability when faced with challenges. If anyone in our family has the capability to finish this, it's you." The recording ended, freezing on Jack's face. Older than Sarah remembered from childhood, his eyes carrying the weight of his secret burden. Sarah sat motionless, overwhelmed by the implications. Her uncle hadn't just been a paranoid veteran with unusual hobbies. He'd been engaged in a decades-long counterintelligence operation, monitoring what appeared to be a deeply embedded network of operatives within the US government itself, and now he had passed that mission to her, along with all its dangers. The automated system waited patiently for instructions, the cursor blinking beside command options. Sarah considered her immediate priorities, understanding the scope of the archive, evaluating the credibility of her uncle's claims, and most urgently, securing her own safety while she determined her next steps. She typed, "Access recent intelligence," hoping to view the most current information before making any decisions. Warning: files dated after September 2007 are encrypted with cardinal authentication. The system responded. Contingency access insufficient for decryption. This suggested her uncle had continued his work even after initiating the failsafe and abandoning the farm. The most recent and potentially most relevant intelligence remained inaccessible to her. Sarah modified her approach. Display Chimera Network Personnel Identification, Western Pennsylvania region, confidence level Alpha only. The screen populated with photographs and biographical information for 12 individuals, names, positions, documented activities supporting their identification as network assets. Sarah recognized several as prominent figures in Pittsburgh's defense contracting community. One was a senior administrator at the research university where she had studied. Most disturbing was the inclusion of 2 FBI officials based in the Pittsburgh field office, potentially explaining the agency's persistent interest in her uncle's property. As she scrolled through the dossiers, a name caught her attention. Collins Eleanor J., Sheriff's Deputy, Somerset County. The deputy who had visited her that afternoon was a suspected Chimera operative. Sarah's skin prickled with alarm. If her uncle's intelligence was accurate, she had already been in direct contact with a network asset. Her inheritance and arrival at the farm would have triggered immediate alerts through their system. The secure phone Henderson had given her vibrated in her pocket. The message was brief. Sedan returned to East Road position. Sheriff vehicle observed at Henderson property 1730. Proceed with caution. Maintain routine visibility. Henderson's warning confirmed Sarah's growing sense that the carefully constructed surveillance net around the farm was tightening. The trapdoor to the underground facility suddenly felt like a potential coffin rather than a resource. If discovered while she was inside, escape would be nearly impossible. Sarah rapidly scanned the available commands, looking for anything that might help secure her position. "Emergency protocols," she typed. The system presented a menu of options, including data transfer, remote activation, facility shutdown, and scorched earth. The last option, presumably some kind of self-destruct mechanism, seemed dangerously final. Instead, Sarah selected data transfer. Please connect authorized storage device to port A3, the system instructed. Sarah examined the workstation and located a panel labeled A3. Behind it was a connection port unlike any standard USB or data interface she recognized. Likely a proprietary design to prevent unauthorized copying. The realization that she couldn't easily extract the data shifted her thinking. Whatever decision she made about her uncle's mission would need to be carefully considered. Acting hastily could result in the permanent loss of everything he had worked to document. For now, her priority had to be establishing a believable presence at the farm, while assessing the various factions interested in her uncle's work. She needed allies, people she could trust with the truth about what she had discovered. Henderson was the obvious starting point, but the sheriff's department's surveillance of his property suggested he was also compromised. Cardinal, her uncle's mysterious handler, might still be active, but she had no way to identify or contact him without accessing the encrypted files. Sarah initiated a system shutdown, watching as the screens darkened and the environmental systems adjusted to minimal power consumption. The voice interface announced, "Facility entering dormant state, security protocols active, access log updated." Before leaving, Sarah examined the storage vaults her uncle had mentioned. Vault 3 contained the briefing package referenced. In his recording, a sealed metal case secured with another biometric lock. It was too large to remove inconspicuously, so she left it in place, making a mental note to return better prepared. She ascended the stairs and carefully closed the trapdoor, ensuring it reset to its concealed state. The barn was still dark and quiet, the night having advanced toward early morning during her time underground. Sarah checked for any signs of disturbance before slipping out the side door and circling back toward the farmhouse. As she approached from the north pasture, Sarah noticed something that sent a surge of adrenaline through her system. Lights were on in the farmhouse. Lights she definitely hadn't left on when she'd departed hours earlier. Someone had entered the house while she was in the underground facility. Sarah froze, weighing her options. Returning to the house meant potentially confronting whoever had entered, possibly Chimera operatives or FBI agents. Avoiding the house would mean abandoning her few possessions and any hope of maintaining the normal routine Henderson had advised. The decision was made for her when the farmhouse door opened and a figure stepped onto the porch, scanning the darkness with a flashlight beam. Sarah dropped to a crouch in the tall grass, hoping the distance and darkness would conceal her position. Dut! Beams swept across the field, passing just above her. Through the darkness, she could make out the uniform of a sheriff's deputy, Collins, the suspected Chimera operative who had visited earlier. Sarah remained motionless, barely breathing, as the deputy continued scanning the property. After what seemed an eternity, Collins returned inside, though the farmhouse lights remained on. It was clear Sarah couldn't return to the house. Not tonight, possibly not ever. Her exploration of the underground facility had been noticed, or at least her absence from the farmhouse had triggered escalated surveillance. She retreated further into the darkness, using the north pasture's slight elevation as cover. Henderson's property lay to the west, but approaching it directly seemed too obvious and dangerous given the known surveillance. Instead, Sarah moved north toward the densely wooded area that formed the farm's boundary in that direction. The secure phone vibrated again. Another message from Henderson: property breach confirmed. Multiple hostiles. Do not return to farmhouse. Proceed to extraction point Delta. Navigation follows. A map appeared on the small screen, showing a route through the woods to a location approximately 2 miles north of her current position. Sarah oriented herself using the stars and the distant silhouette of the mountain ridge visible against the night sky, then began making her way through the darkness, leaving behind the farm and everything it contained. Whatever her uncle had been involved in, it was now undeniably her problem too. The simple inheritance that had seemed like a lifeline after losing her job had transformed into something far more complex and dangerous. A hidden war between shadow operations that had already claimed at least 2 lives and now threatened her own. As she moved through the darkness, Sarah thought about the 3 options her uncle had presented. Walk away, alert authorities, or complete the mission. With armed operatives now occupying the farmhouse, the first option seemed increasingly impossible. Her choices were narrowing by the hour. The extraction point turned out to be an old hunting cabin, its weathered exterior nearly invisible among the dense pines. Sarah approached cautiously, alert for any signs of surveillance or traps. The journey through unfamiliar forest in darkness had been grueling, fallen logs and hidden depressions threatening her ankles with each step, branches scratching her face and arms as she pushed through thickets. Henderson was waiting inside, his familiar German shepherd alerting him to her approach before she reached the cabin door. He opened it before she could knock, quickly ushering her inside and securing 3 separate locks once she'd entered. "They moved faster than I anticipated," he said without preamble, his expression grim in the cabin's dim light. A single kerosene lamp provided the only illumination, suggesting Henderson was avoiding electrical systems that might be detected from a distance. "Deputy Collins was in my house," Sarah confirmed, sinking onto a wooden chair, her legs trembling from exertion. "And adrenaline. And you said there were multiple hostiles?" Henderson nodded, moving to a small table where communication equipment was arranged. Not modern technology, but older systems, analog rather than digital. Thermal imaging from my security perimeter showed 4 individuals entering the farmhouse. Approximately 30 minutes after you left it, 2 remained inside, 2 began searching the outbuildings. "They're looking for me," Sarah said, the reality of her situation settling like a weight on her chest. "No," Henderson corrected, "they're looking for what Jack left behind. You're just a means to an end for them." He studied her intently. "Which suggests you found something. The underground facility?" Sarah nodded, unsurprised that Henderson knew of its existence. "A bunker beneath the barn, climate-controlled, still operational. It contains decades of intelligence my uncle gathered on something called the Chimera Network." Henderson's breath caught audibly. "He actually recorded that name in the system?" Jack was always careful about explicit documentation. "There was a briefing video prepared specifically for me," Sarah explained. "He knew I would eventually access the facility." "What else did you find?" Sarah described the archive's contents, the automated interface, and her uncle's recorded message with its 3 options. Deputy Collins was listed in the personnel files as a suspected network operative. The system had dossiers on 12 individuals in western Pennsylvania, including 2 FBI agents from the Pittsburgh office. Henderson absorbed this information with the gravity of someone who understood its full implications. "The fact that they've moved so quickly suggests they detected your access to the facility. Jack had countermeasures against external monitoring, but they weren't infallible." "What happens now?" Sarah asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "They've taken my house. Everything I own is there." "Material possessions are replaceable," Henderson said dismissively. "Your uncle's archive isn't, nor is your life." He adjusted the dial on one of his communication devices, monitoring a frequency for signals. "We need to determine your next steps based on strategic priorities, not emotional attachments." The soldier in him was fully present now, tactical considerations overriding social niceties. Sarah recognized the shift and responded accordingly, pushing aside her exhaustion and fear to focus on the immediate problem. The archive contained a briefing package in something called Vault 3. My uncle said it included communication protocols, evidence packages, and emergency identity documents. "I couldn't remove it during my first visit," Henderson nodded. "Jack always maintained escape routes. The question is whether we can access the facility again now that they're actively searching the property." Sarah considered this. "The entrance is well concealed, and the access protocol requires specific knowledge. They might not find it immediately." "They're professionals," Henderson cautioned. They'll methodically examine every inch of that property. It's not a question of if they find the entrance, but when. Then we need to get to it first, Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. Retrieve the briefing package and whatever else might be useful. Henderson raised an eyebrow, perhaps surprised by her resolve. It would mean returning to a property now under hostile control, accessing a facility they're actively searching for, and extracting materials while evading detection. The tactical challenges are significant. Do we have alternatives? Sarah asked. Henderson was silent for a moment, considering possibilities. We could attempt to contact Cardinal directly. Jack maintained emergency communication protocols. Dead. Drops, recognition signals, fallback methods that wouldn't rely on electronic channels. Would Cardinal still be active after all this time? My uncle's recording suggested uncertainty about his status. In this business, uncertainty is the only constant, Henderson replied. But Cardinal was the architect of the entire Sentinel operation. If anyone has remained vigilant, it would be him. Sarah thought about the encrypted files dated after 2007, accessible only with Cardinal's authentication. Even if we contact him, we'd still need access to the facility to utilize his credentials. Henderson acknowledged this with a reluctant nod. You're right. The facility remains the critical objective. He moved to a battered metal trunk in the corner of the cabin and extracted a topographical map of the area. We need to identify alternative approaches. The most obvious access points will be under surveillance. Together they studied the map, Henderson pointing out terrain features and likely observation posts. The farm's perimeter is extensive, too large for them to monitor comprehensively without significant resources. Their focus will be on the structures and the access roads. Could we approach through the forest? Sarah suggested. The north pasture connects to these woods. Possible, but they'll anticipate that, Henderson warned. Standard procedure would include motion sensors and possibly infrared monitoring of obvious approach routes. Sarah recalled something from her uncle's journal. There were mentions of an old drainage system beneath the dairy operation. Could that provide access? Henderson's expression shifted with interest. The original dairy infrastructure included underground cooling systems, concrete channels for running cold water beneath the milk storage area. Jack repurposed some of those when constructing the facility. He traced a route on the map. If memory serves, one channel extended to the creek that runs along the eastern property line. Would it connect to the underground facility? Not directly, but it might get us beneath the barn without crossing exposed ground. Henderson continued studying the map. The outlet would be here, where the creek bends toward the old orchard. It's been decades since I've seen it, but these structures were built to last. Sarah processed this information, mentally calculating risks against potential benefits. When should we try? Tonight is too risky. They'll be at their most alert. And you need rest. Henderson folded the map decisively. Tomorrow during daylight, counterintuitive, but they'll be expecting night movement. Their thermal imaging is less effective in direct sunlight, and the creek provides a natural explanation for someone moving along the water's edge. The tactical logic made sense, though the prospect of waiting nearly a full day caused Sarah physical unease. What about the people at the farmhouse? Won't they be looking for me? Undoubtedly, Henderson confirmed. Which is why we need to create a diversion. Give them something else to focus on while we access the facility. He moved to a different case and extracted what looked like outdated military communications equipment. These transponders can be programmed to emit signals matching the secure phone's frequency. We'll place them at strategic locations away from our actual approach route, suggesting movement in the opposite direction. The level of preparation impressed Sarah. Henderson had clearly maintained operational readiness despite his age and seeming isolation. You've been planning for this scenario, Jack, Robert and I established contingency protocols for dozens of scenarios, Henderson explained, his voice holding a hint of professional pride. When you've spent decades monitoring a shadow network with the resources these people command, you learn to anticipate their playbook. My uncle's recording suggested the network has functional immunity because of how deeply they've integrated into legitimate structures, Sarah said. How do you fight something like that? Henderson's weathered face showed a complex mix of determination and resignation. Not through conventional channels. The standard mechanisms for addressing corruption, oversight committees, inspectors, the press, all assume the basic framework remains sound. This is different. This is systematic subversion of the framework itself. Then what's the end goal? Sarah pressed. What was my uncle trying to achieve with all this documentation? Controlled disclosure to multiple international entities simultaneously. Henderson replied, carefully authenticated evidence packages delivered to specific journalists, legislators, and foreign intelligence services known to operate independently of network influence. Too many recipients for containment, too well documented for dismissal. The scale of the operation her uncle had envisioned was staggering. And that's what's in the briefing package? The means to distribute this evidence? Most likely. Jack was always the strategist among us. He would have created meticulous instructions, alternate pathways if primary methods failed. Henderson's expression softened slightly. He would also have provided you an exit strategy, a way to deliver the evidence while protecting yourself from the inevitable blowback. Sarah thought about the third option her uncle had presented. Complete the mission. The enormity of what that entailed was becoming clearer. Not just revealing corruption within government agencies, but exposing a decades-long infiltration that had shaped policy and operations from within. Why me? She asked quietly. My uncle barely knew me. We hadn't spoken in years. Henderson considered. This. Jack tracked your life from a distance, your education, career choices, personal associations. He would have evaluated numerous factors, your digital footprint, your connection to potential network-affiliated institutions, your psychological profile, as revealed through your professional and personal decisions. He was spying on me? The notion was unsettling. Assessing you, Henderson corrected, and maintaining distance to avoid creating connections that might endanger you. The fact that he selected you suggests he saw something specific, capabilities or characteristics that matched the mission requirements. Sarah tried to reconcile this calculated evaluation with her memories of the distant uncle who had sent birthday cards with $5 bills. Had those small gestures been his way of maintaining minimal contact while observing her development from afar? The thought was both comforting and disturbing. Henderson checked his watch. You should rest. There's a cot in the back room. I'll monitor communications and prepare the equipment for tomorrow's operation. Sarah wanted to protest that she was too wired for sleep, but her body betrayed her with a jaw-cracking yawn. The adrenaline that had sustained her was ebbing, leaving bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. Wake me if anything changes, she requested, moving toward the small back room Henderson had indicated. One more thing, Henderson said, his tone shifting to something less tactical and more personal. Jack made a choice to involve you, but you still have options. Walking away remains possible, though increasingly complicated. Don't feel obligated to complete his mission simply because he selected you. The unexpected compassion in his voice caught Sarah off guard. For all his military precision and strategic focus, Henderson recognized the human element in their situation. Thank you, she managed, unsure how else to respond to his surprising empathy. The back room was spartanly furnished, a narrow cot with wool blankets, a small table with another kerosene lamp, and a footlocker that presumably contained Henderson's personal belongings. Sarah removed her shoes, but otherwise lay down fully clothed, aware that she might need to move quickly if their situation changed. Despite her racing thoughts, exhaustion claimed her almost immediately. Her sleep was fitful, populated by dreams of underground chambers, faceless pursuers, and her uncle's voice offering cryptic warnings from video screens that multiplied across her dreamscape. Sarah woke to dim light, filtering through a small window, and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment she couldn't place her surroundings. Then the previous day's events crashed back into her consciousness. The underground facility, Deputy Collins in her farmhouse, her nighttime escape through the woods. She found Henderson at his communications station, monitoring frequencies with the focused attention of someone who had spent decades performing similar tasks. Trinity lay at his feet, the German shepherd's ears perking up as Sarah entered the main room. "Any developments?" she asked, accepting the mug of black coffee Henderson offered without comment. "Some chatter on the sheriff's department frequency," he replied. "They've officially listed you as a person of interest regarding unspecified suspicious activity. They're describing you as potentially confused or disoriented, suggesting mental health concerns to justify their search." "Classic discrediting tactic," Sarah noted, recalling similar patterns from her uncle's archive. "Make me sound unstable, so anything I might say about their activities can be dismissed." Henderson nodded approvingly at her analysis. "They're establishing groundwork for multiple scenarios. If they find you, they can claim protective custody for your condition. If you evade them and attempt to expose their activities, they've already planted seeds of doubt about your reliability." "What about the farm itself?" "Minimal visible activity. One vehicle remains in the driveway, Collins's patrol car. The others have been moved off-site, suggesting they're attempting to maintain the appearance of normal law enforcement activity rather than a full operation." Sarah processed this information while sipping the strong coffee. "Does that help or hinder our approach plan?" "Both," Henderson admitted. "Fewer personnel means less surveillance coverage, but it also means they're being cautious, avoiding drawing attention from uninvolved observers." He spread the topographical map on the table, now marked with annotations indicating their planned route. "We'll proceed as discussed. Approach via the creek, locate the drainage outlet, and follow it to the barn infrastructure. Based on thermal imaging captured overnight, they've conducted preliminary searches of all buildings, but haven't yet identified the underground access point." "When do we move?" "Noon," Henderson stated confidently. "Maximum solar interference with their thermal systems, and they'll be expecting reduced activity during peak daylight hours." Sarah nodded, trusting his tactical assessment. "What do we bring?" "Minimal equipment. Anything we don't absolutely need is a liability if we're compromised." He indicated a small backpack already prepared. "Water, basic tools for accessing the drainage system, and this." He handed her what looked like an oversized USB drive with a rubberized exterior. "Military-grade data storage. If we can't extract physical materials, we copy critical files." The morning passed with tense anticipation as they reviewed the approach plan repeatedly. Henderson taught Sarah recognition signals and emergency extraction protocols in case they became separated. She absorbed the information with the same focused attention she had applied to mastering complex publishing systems and editorial processes in her former career. "Your adaptability is impressive," Henderson observed during a rare break in their preparations. "Most civilians struggle with operational security concepts on first exposure." "I spent 12 years managing complex projects with multiple stakeholders and conflicting priorities," Sarah replied. "The context is different, but the fundamental skills translate: identifying critical paths, anticipating failure points, maintaining information compartmentalization." Henderson's expression suggested this explanation aligned with his own assessment. Jack saw that in you, the ability to apply existing skills to novel challenges. As noon approached, they made final preparations. Henderson secured the cabin, leaving Trinity inside with enough food and water for 48 hours. If we're not back by then, she's programmed to seek alternative shelter, he explained, patting the intelligent animal's head affectionately. They moved through the forest using natural features for concealment, Henderson leading with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades in similar terrain. Sarah followed his example, matching his movement patterns and maintaining the intervals he established between them. After nearly an hour of careful progress, they reached the creek that marked the eastern boundary of her uncle's property. From their position behind a cluster of boulders, they could see the farmhouse in the distance, seemingly quiet, with Collins's patrol car still visible in the driveway. No obvious external surveillance on this approach, Henderson murmured, scanning the area with compact binoculars. They're either confident in their perimeter technology or focusing resources elsewhere. They followed the creek southward, staying within the tree line until reaching the bend Henderson had identified on the map. Here, the water curved toward what had once been the farm's orchard, now overgrown and barely recognizable as a cultivated area. The drainage outlet should be along this bank, Henderson indicated, moving closer to the water's edge, likely obscured by decades of vegetation growth. Together they searched the creek bank, pushing aside tangled undergrowth and examining the terrain for signs of man-made structures. After 20 minutes of increasingly anxious searching, Sarah spotted something, a curved edge of concrete, partly visible beneath a collapsed section of soil. "Here," she called softly, already clearing away debris to reveal what appeared to be a large drainage pipe, its opening approximately 3 feet in diameter. Henderson joined her, examining the structure with approval. Good condition considering its age. The farm was built to proper specifications. He produced a small flashlight from his pack and directed the beam into the pipe. "Water level is low. We can traverse it crouching rather than crawling. Less noise, better mobility if we encounter problems." Sarah eyed the dark opening with understandable apprehension. The confined space promised darkness, spiders, and possibly other wildlife that had made the abandoned drainage system home over the decades. But the alternative, approaching the barn across open ground under potential surveillance, was clearly more dangerous. Henderson entered first, moving with the careful deliberation of someone navigating potentially treacherous terrain. Sarah followed, forcing herself to focus on their mission rather than the claustrophobic conditions or the occasional scurrying sounds that suggested small creatures disturbed by their passage. The pipe extended approximately 200 yards, occasionally branching into smaller channels that Henderson ignored, maintaining their course toward the barn's foundation. The air grew progressively staler as they moved deeper into the system, carrying the musty scent of decades-old concrete and stagnant water. Finally, the pipe opened into a larger chamber, what appeared to be a collection basin beneath the old dairy operation. Dim light filtered through grates in the ceiling, providing just enough illumination to navigate without flashlights. "The barn should be directly above us," Henderson whispered, examining the chamber's layout. "These support columns match the main structure's footprint." Sarah oriented herself, trying to identify where the center of the barn would be, the location of the concealed trapdoor. "The entrance to the facility was approximately here," she indicated, moving toward a section where the concrete floor appeared newer than the surrounding areas. Henderson examined the section carefully, running his fingers along barely perceptible seams in the concrete. "This isn't just a floor, it's another access point." He pressed specific areas in sequence, similar to the pressure points Sarah had activated from above. A section of the floor recessed slightly, then slid sideways with surprising quietness, revealing a narrow passage with metal rungs embedded. In the wall, Henderson gestured for Sarah to wait while he descended first, ensuring the passage was secure. After a tense moment, his whispered "clear" echoed up from below. Sarah followed him down the rungs, emerging into a familiar space, the underground facility she had accessed the previous night. The emergency lighting provided the same soft illumination, the computer terminals remained in standby mode, everything appeared undisturbed. "They haven't found it yet," Sarah said, relief evident in her voice despite her attempt at operational. "Discipline! That won't last," Henderson cautioned, already moving toward the workstation. "We need to be efficient. Show me the vault containing the briefing package." Sarah led him to Vault 3, explaining the biometric security and her uncle's reference to blood-related access. Henderson examined the locking mechanism thoughtfully. Standard familial DNA authentication. It's looking for genetic markers you share with Jack. Hand on the scanner should be sufficient. Sarah placed her palm on the indicated surface, and after a moment's processing, the vault door released with a soft click. Inside was a metal case approximately the size of a large briefcase, secured with another biometric lock that yielded to her touch. The case contained exactly what her uncle had described: sealed document packets labeled for specific recipients, data storage devices of various types, and a leather portfolio containing what appeared to be identity documents. Most surprising was a thick envelope bearing her name in what she recognized as her uncle's handwriting. "Personal message," Henderson noted, seeing her fixate on the envelope. "Secure it, but read it later. We need to prioritize operational materials." Sarah nodded, tucking the envelope into an inner pocket while Henderson examined the rest of the vault's contents. He selected specific document packages and data devices, transferring them to their backpack with practiced efficiency. "We can't take everything," he explained. "Need to prioritize based on strategic value and portability." As they worked, Sarah noticed something that had escaped her attention during her first visit: a small red light blinking on a panel near the main workstation. "What's that indicator?" she asked, pointing to the light. Henderson followed her gaze, his expression immediately shifting to alarm. "Perimeter breach notification. Someone's approaching the access point we used last night." They froze, listening intently. From above came the faint sound of the barn door opening, followed by multiple sets of footsteps on the wooden floor. "They've identified the entrance," Henderson whispered, his voice barely audible even in the quiet facility. "We need to exit immediately, back the way we came." They quickly gathered the most critical materials, securing them in the backpack. Henderson led the way back to the maintenance passage, both moving with deliberate care to minimize noise. As they reached the ladder, a mechanical hum emanated from above, the sound of the trapdoor's hydraulic system activating. Someone was accessing the facility from the barn. "Move!" Henderson urged, gesturing toward the drainage pipe. "Now!" Sarah and Henderson raced through the underground drainage system, the sounds of pursuit growing more distant as they navigated the labyrinth of pipes beneath the farm. The backpack containing her uncle's critical intelligence bounced against Sarah's back with each hurried step, a physical reminder of the responsibility she now carried. "They'll secure the facility and then expand their search," Henderson said, as they finally emerged at the creek outlet, both gasping for fresh air. "We have minutes at most before they organize a perimeter sweep." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the property, providing some cover as they stayed low and moved quickly along the creek bank. From their position, Sarah could see increased activity at the farmhouse. Additional vehicles had arrived, dark SUVs with government plates. Men in tactical gear moved with purpose around the property perimeter. "Federal Tactical Team," Henderson identified with a grim expression. This operation just escalated beyond local assets. They retreated into the forest, using the dense undergrowth as concealment while making their way back toward Henderson's cabin. Sarah's mind raced with questions about their next steps, but operational security demanded silence until they reached safety. The journey back seemed to take far longer than their approach, each snapping twig and rustling leaf triggering fresh waves of anxiety. When they finally reached the hunting cabin, Trinity greeted them with alert vigilance rather than her usual enthusiasm, the shepherd sensing the tension in their body language. Henderson secured the door behind them, immediately moving to his communications equipment to check for signs that their location had been compromised. "Perimeter systems are still clear," he reported after a tense moment. "But we can't stay long. They'll expand their search radius methodically." Sarah carefully removed the backpack, placing it on the table with the reverence of someone handling historical artifacts. In many ways, that's exactly what they had retrieved, the documentary evidence of a decades-long shadow operation that had shaped American intelligence from within. "What now?" she asked, the enormity of their situation settling over her like a physical weight. Henderson gestured toward the backpack. "Now we execute Jack's plan. The briefing package will contain specific instructions for distributing the evidence to the designated recipients." Sarah remembered her uncle's recorded message. Journalists, legislators, and foreign intelligence services selected for their independence from network influence. A strategic distribution designed to ensure the information couldn't be contained or dismissed. "Before we proceed, you should read Jack's letter," Henderson suggested, his tone softening slightly. "He would have included personal context that might influence your decisions." Sarah withdrew the thick envelope from her pocket, breaking the seal with trembling fingers. Inside were several pages of handwritten text, her uncle's precise, angular script covering both sides of each sheet. She began reading, the familiar yet strange voice of a man she barely knew emerging from the pages. "Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, you've already demonstrated more courage and capability than most people will need to summon in a lifetime. You've found the facility, accessed the archive, and retrieved this briefing package, all while likely being hunted by people with nearly unlimited resources. I owe you an explanation for why I've drawn you into this dangerous world. The simplest answer is that you were the only suitable candidate within my limited circle of trust. But the fuller truth is that I've watched your development from afar, recognizing in you qualities that reminded me of myself before Vietnam changed. Everything, analytical intelligence, quiet determination, and a fundamental sense of justice that doesn't announce itself but runs deep nonetheless. What we discovered in 1979, Robert, Hank, and I, was not just another Cold War operation. It was evidence of systematic subversion, a network that had insinuated itself into our intelligence apparatus so thoroughly that conventional counterintelligence measures were useless against it. We went outside the system because the system itself had been compromised. For nearly 30 years, we documented their activities, identities, and methods. Cardinal, our only ally within official channels, helped establish our operation and protected it as best he could. But even he couldn't prevent what happened to Robert or the breach that forced me to abandon the farm. The briefing package contains everything needed to expose the Chimera network, evidence carefully authenticated, distribution channels strategically selected, timing coordinated for maximum impact before they can organize containment measures. But the decision to proceed rests with you. Here is what I could never say in an official recording. You have a life worth living, Sarah. Dreams and aspirations that have nothing to do with clandestine operations or decades-old conspiracies. I have no right to ask you to sacrifice that life for this mission. If you choose to walk away, the enclosed passport and banking information will provide you the means to disappear. A new identity established in a country beyond network influence, with sufficient resources to build a new life. No one would blame you for this choice, least of all me. If you choose to proceed with the mission, know that Cardinal remains active as of my last communication in 2012. The recognition protocol is included in the briefing documents. He can provide the additional security and authentication needed to maximize the impact of the disclosure. Whatever you decide, know that watching you grow into the woman you've become, even from a distance, has been one of the few genuine pleasures. In a life otherwise consumed by shadows and suspicion, I regret that my work prevented me from being the uncle you deserved, but I never stopped caring about your welfare. The world is full of people who look away from uncomfortable truths. You've never been one of them. Trust that quality in yourself, whatever path you choose. With respect and affection, Jack. Sarah lowered the pages, emotion tightening her throat. The uncle she'd barely known had been watching over her all along, balancing his duty to his mission against his concern for her safety. Even now, knowing what was at stake, he'd provided her an escape route, a way to walk away from the danger and start fresh. He gave me a choice, she said quietly, meeting Henderson's expectant gaze. A new identity, resources to disappear. Henderson nodded, unsurprised. Jack always considered all contingencies. He wouldn't want you to feel trapped by his decisions. Sarah rose from her chair, moving to the cabin's small window. Through the gaps in the pine branches, she could see a sliver of her uncle's farm in the distance, the property that had become the center of an intelligence operation with implications that reached to the highest levels of government. The publishing job she'd lost in Pittsburgh seemed impossibly distant now, belonging to another life. She'd come to the farm seeking nothing more than temporary shelter while figuring out her next steps. Instead, she'd inherited a mission that spanned decades and threatened powerful people who operated with near impunity. In the silence of the cabin, Sarah opened her uncle's briefing package, examining the carefully organized documents with their color-coded distribution instructions. The thoroughness of the preparation was astounding. Each recipient profile included authentication procedures, security protocols, and contingency measures if primary channels were compromised. Cardinal is still active, she noted, finding the recognition protocol her uncle had mentioned. My uncle confirmed contact as recently as 2012. Henderson's expression showed relief mingled with surprise. That's more recent than I expected. If Cardinal has maintained his position, he represents our best chance for securing official protection during the disclosure process. The tactical considerations were clear. Cardinal's involvement would provide additional legitimacy and potentially shield them from immediate network retaliation. But the human element remained paramount in Sarah's mind. This faceless intelligence official had been her uncle's only ally within the system for decades. If anyone understood the true significance of what they had uncovered, it would be him. The recognition protocol requires direct contact, Sarah observed, examining the instructions. No electronic communication, no intermediaries. Standard deep cover procedure, Henderson confirmed. Limits exposure, prevents technological interception. Sarah continued reading, the details of her uncle's plan unfolding with meticulous precision. The disclosure was designed as a cascading release. Initial evidence provided to 3 journalists known for their independence, followed by more comprehensive packages to selected legislators and inspectors general. The final stage involved foreign intelligence services chosen for their adversarial relationship with the network's suspected international affiliations. He mapped out every step, Sarah said, with growing appreciation for her uncle's strategic mind. Contingencies for every scenario, fallback positions if primary contacts are compromised. Henderson nodded, the professional respect evident in his expression. Jack was always the methodical one. Robert had the technical brilliance. I handled field operations. But Jack saw the big picture, how all the pieces fit together across time and space. As they studied the briefing documents, a pattern emerged that Sarah hadn't initially recognized. Her uncle had structured the entire operation around her specific capabilities. The journalism contacts included editors she had worked with during her publishing career. The documentation formats matched systems she was trained in. Even the authentication procedures utilized verification methods familiar to someone with her professional background. He designed this for me, she realized aloud, not just selecting me as his contingency, but tailoring the entire disclosure process to my specific skill set. Jack never left anything to chance, Henderson agreed. He would have analyzed your capabilities and adapted the operational parameters accordingly. The realization solidified something in Sarah's mind, a sense of purpose that crystallized her decision. Her uncle hadn't merely left her a farm and a mission. He had created a role that only she could fill, leveraging her unique combination of skills and experiences. "I need to contact Cardinal," she stated with newfound determination. "Initiate the disclosure process exactly as my uncle designed it." Henderson studied her carefully, perhaps looking for signs of uncertainty. Finding none, he nodded once. "The recognition meeting will be high risk. The network has likely been monitoring all potential Cardinal communication channels since Jack disappeared, which is why we follow the protocol precisely," Sarah replied, already internalizing the operational mindset her situation demanded. No deviations, no improvisations. As they prepared for the next phase, gathering only essential equipment and planning their route to the designated meeting location, Sarah felt a strange sense of clarity. The fear and confusion that had followed her discovery of the underground facility hadn't disappeared, but they had been channeled into focused purpose. She was no longer simply Sarah Hayes, unemployed publishing assistant inheriting a dilapidated farm. She was the culmination of her uncle's 3-decade mission, the designated heir to evidence that could expose a shadow network operating within the highest levels of American intelligence. The path ahead would be dangerous, demanding skills she was still developing and courage she wasn't entirely sure she possessed. But as she secured her uncle's letter inside her jacket, close to her heart, Sarah recognized that she had already crossed the threshold between her old life and whatever awaited her. "Ready?" Henderson asked, shouldering a small pack containing only the most critical materials. Sarah nodded, taking one last look around the cabin that had briefly served as refuge. "Ready." Together they slipped into the gathering dusk, 2 figures, moving silently through the pine forest, carrying documentation of a conspiracy that had remained hidden for decades. Whether they would succeed in exposing the Chimera network or join the list of those who had tried and failed remained uncertain. But one thing had become clear to Sarah as she read her uncle's letter and studied his meticulous plans. Some truths demanded witnesses, regardless of the personal cost. Jack Miller had dedicated his life to documenting such a truth. Now she would ensure his work hadn't been in vain. The story of Sarah Hayes and her extraordinary inheritance was just beginning. A simple woman who took over a family farm only to discover secrets that would shock the FBI and potentially change the course of American intelligence history. If this story of courage, conspiracy, and unexpected purpose resonated with you, make sure you're subscribed to our channel for more compelling narratives that explore the extraordinary circumstances ordinary people sometimes face. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell right now so you never miss our latest uploads. Tomorrow, we'll share another remarkable true story that shows just how thin the line between ordinary life and extraordinary discovery can sometimes be. Until then, remember that even the most unassuming inheritance might contain secrets worth uncovering.